Today's guest served over 20 years as a senior foreign service officer in a range of different cultures and situations. He has also worked previously for over 15 years with a wide array of non-profit private voluntary agencies and NGOs. Welcome to the show, Mr. Wind. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me, Toby. Great day. And please feel free to call me Alonzo.
Alonzo, yes. Thank you so much, Alonzo. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Mirror Talk. As we said earlier, or as I said earlier, or during the conversation, we didn't talk about that quite well, I guess. You are a retired senior foreign service officer from the U.S. Agency for International Development. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And you have worked pardon?
No, I was, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Sorry. And you have worked in various parts of the world. You started your career as a rural public health US Peace Corps volunteer, where you were widely known as Dr. Alonzo. Can you share your life and career journey with me? Why were you known as Dr. Alonzo?
Well, as you just mentioned, I started out as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer working in rural public health, and this was really a bit of an ambition I'd had growing up and in college. I knew that I would want to serve in the Peace Corps because Peace Corps has a lot of meaning and significance, at least it did at that time in the United States, kind of the aspirations and optimism from the 1960s, President Kennedy, President Johnson and the like, before things began to turn a bit sour in the political dialogue in the United States. But I had this idea that I would go and serve 2 years in the Peace Corps and then probably return to the United States in terms of following a career. And things did not quite play out. They ended up turning in a very different direction.
Yeah. Oh. Well, can you tell me, how you went from that Peace Corps to, being in the US ID?
Well, I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador, rural Ecuador on the Pacific coast of South America. And I was first working in some coastal villages, applying the Spanish that I had a refresher in during Peace Corps training, and also Spanish that I had studied in high school, as well as basic training that the Peace Corps provided me in terms of public health education, basic nutrition, sanitation, digging latrines, well digging and the like, and basically living among the poor families on in the coastal part of Ecuador. As it turned out, I really found a tremendous sense of fulfillment working with families in Ecuador. And following my 2 years of Peace Corps service, I was invited to join a non-governmental organization working in another part of Ecuador, an organization known as Plan International. Back then it was known as Foster Parents Plan, where I served as a program advisor. And that really was a start of a vocation. I realized that I would not be heading back to the United States anytime soon, but would continue to work and deepen my own understanding, deepen my own skills in terms of integrated rural development, community development at the most basic village level, family level, trying to work ultimately with promoters and community educators to improve the quality of the program being offered. And what initially had been planned as a 2-year adventure ended up becoming 5 years in Ecuador, working at different levels, increasing levels of responsibility. And things were kind of cemented in when, towards the end of those 5 years, I ended up being headhunted and invited by a US-based private voluntary organization called Esperanza, which had a rudimentary primary healthcare program in Bolivia and was famous for operating a hospital ship, kind of like Project Hope, on the Brazilian Amazon, to go and serve as ultimately their country director in Bolivia. And that would be the start of another 5-year adventure in Bolivia,
Wow.
where I took on greater and greater responsibilities managing larger and larger programs, which ultimately, I think it's fair to say, impacted significantly on the public health
Mm.
for many Bolivian people.
Wow, that's awesome. And what does Peace Corps means to the world? And what does it mean to you also?
Well,
Like,
that's a good question, Toby. For me, Peace Corps is really the embodiment within really the United States of service, national service. We don't have a national service obligation in the United States, and we don't even have a military draft anymore. That was ended um, at the end of the Vietnam War.
mm,
And I think, regardless of your politics and your position in terms of the military and a military draft, there really is something important to be said about a national service obligation, such as is applied in a number of different countries in Europe and Israel and other countries. Because the reality is, and I think it's certainly true for people this day and age, when you're graduating high school or going into college, you don't necessarily have a good idea in terms of what are the sorts of things you can do.
mm,
And what better way than a national service obligation of a year or two to expose you to things which may be outside of your usual experience
yeah,
and to force you to come to terms with things that you hadn't quite understood or had been otherwise exposed to in terms of different cultures, different practices, different economic conditions of people, to serve your country in some way. In my case, in Peace Corps, you know, trying to contribute to supporting the interaction with underdeveloped countries, trying to improve the outreach that the United States was providing in terms of foreign assistance.
yeah,
And really, Peace Corps comes down to a people to people relationship above all,
mm,
where people who go out for 2 years as a volunteer in different capacities, be it health or education or teaching English or agriculture, they not only serve a technical function in terms of actually helping people in different countries,
mm,
but really they learn so much, they
mm,
gain so much from the people of those countries in terms of a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation of what the world is like. And building those bridges of understanding is really at the heart of what Peace Corps is about. In my case, it also was a stepping stone to the development of a career in international development and humanitarian assistance, first with a group of different non-governmental organizations, and then eventually to, as you mentioned earlier, the Foreign Service and the Senior Foreign Service in a diplomatic capacity with the United States government in the administration of foreign assistance.
mm. Wow. And what were like, some of the most important and moving experiences that you had as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador?
Well, I really had a range of experiences, both good and bad. I think on the challenging side, certainly living the life of many of the rural families, in some cases, the campesinos, as they say in Spanish, the peasantry,
Mm,
living in small communities. I too also faced some of the health challenges that they faced, in terms of having to drink water that wasn't clean or
mm,
pure
mm,
and be exposed to not necessarily the best of food supplies. And so I faced my own sort of health challenges off and on. I won't get too graphic in this conversation unless you ask questions about it, although I talk about it a bit in the Ecuador chapter of the book, the
mm,
kinds of things that I also had to face in terms of my own health.
yeah,
Um, but I think even more importantly, I came to see the reality of the people in terms of how uh, really they were marginalized from the benefits of a good education system and a good health system,
mm,
and how that left them, how that contributed and reinforced the poverty that they were also facing. And I'd like to believe it helped me develop a greater recognition and appreciation for the sort of privilege that I had as a not necessarily wealthy, but certainly relatively comfortable American coming from middle class background in the States, and having to see the reality that's certainly far more true for so many hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world. So
Yeah.
really opened up my awareness. I think probably one of the most meaningful experiences were in terms of some of my health experiences, seeing children, uh, often under 5 years of age, die for really reasons that were entirely preventable. I talk a bit in the book in terms of seeing experiences with children in the community that I was initially working in, suffering from intestinal worms, and then dying from that. Something that really could have been avoided so easily with access to pure water.
Yes, yes. That's really sad. That's really, yeah, heartbreaking actually. And talking about your book, I would love us to, talk about it right now, your memoir entitled Andean's Adventure. Can you tell me more about this memoir? What was the inspiration behind it? I know it's about your life experiences, but what inspired you to, put the pen on paper and write it?
Well, I call it Andean Adventures because by far the largest portion of the book really takes place in the Andean countries of Northwest South America,
Mm,
essentially Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru. But they also represent sequentially the first countries that I came to work in before I realized that I would basically be working as a vocation, as a career in international development and humanitarian assistance. And I thought the purpose of the book was to try to describe for readers, young and young at heart, the meaning of what service, working within um, impoverished countries,
mm,
the development of vocation, how the meaning of that came to touch me, and the importance, I think, of similar or comparable experiences for others.
yeah.
We were talking a moment ago in the pre-game show, so to speak, uh, in
Yeah.
terms of the whole idea of national service. And,
Mm,
I do talk about in the book the sense that I think that the United States should consider emulating other countries that have a national service program.
mm,
And I think, that's true for many countries. I think taking young people, who are in their early 20s, exposing them to circumstances where they don't really have any control, where they're exposed to people of different economic classes,
mm,
different racial backgrounds, different social backgrounds, helps us to grow as people, helps to widen our own understanding
yeah.
really of the world around us. I think it also helps build compassion and empathy for anyone in
Mm,
terms of giving them exposure to different sorts of experiences like that. And
yes.
I think it helps us be better at whatever ultimately our um, lifetime vocation and job may
Mm,
be. Not everyone is necessarily going to want to consider working in the kinds of circumstances that I did,
yeah.
but even people going back home to work as a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or a politician will
Mm.
hopefully find their spirit and their understanding of the world widened by having that kind of national service experience.
Yes, that's true. Wow. And your book is so wonderful because it reminds us of the importance of understanding, respecting, and accepting our cultural differences also. So, how can we best do this? How can we best understand, respect, and accept our cultural differences? Like, how did you do it in Ecuador, for example? You're from the US, living in Ecuador. How are you able to, come to terms with the cultural differences?
Well, I guess to a certain extent, you could say trial by error. I mean, I made more than my share of mistakes
Mm,
in terms of misreading different social circumstances, as well as being exposed to uh, people that I wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to. For example, I talk a bit about my host family
mm,
in Buena Fe, Quevedo, where the host father, you could say, Don Guido Montes, who was originally serving as my guide, my entree into the community of Buena Fe,
mm,
how I came to see his life. He was, on one level, the proprietor of a pharmacy, um, a very small little drugstore in this village of Buena Fe,
mm,
the Farmacia San Martin. But he was also essentially a trained, you could say, nurse's aide, able to do kind of rudimentary things. But he was also on another level, something that in Spanish we might call a curandero,
mm,
basically a traditional healer. Perhaps it would be better understood by people. The poorest and most indigent people of the village and really surrounding villages would come to him with their different complaints and seeking uh, health advice, medical advice.
mm,
They prefer to come and talk to him rather than necessarily the more formally trained doctors that were in town at the Ministry of Health subcenter.
yeah,
uh, you know, I had something of an initial reaction where I looked at that a bit askance, a bit suspicious, thinking, well, Guido isn't really trained, to act like a doctor and all of this. Is this really good that he's doing? Is he really perhaps doing a disservice to the people that are coming to him? But I also came to see that in essence, he also was fulfilling on some level a pastoral function. He was accessible to the people. They could talk to him about their problems. Guido would offer advice. And when things were not necessarily, in his range of understanding, he was smart enough to know that he had to bring in a more professionally trained doctor
mm,
in terms of being able to help. And in fact, Guido had a kind of a improvised clinic in the back of the pharmacy, and he actually hired these two doctors who were working for him.
mm,
Uh, this relatively uneducated traditional healer. They were working for him, and they would provide, on the one hand, this legitimacy as far as the Ministry of Health was concerned for what Guido was doing,
yeah,
but they also fulfilled a service in terms of working with a traditional healer like Guido in terms of addressing problems.
mm,
And I came to realize that, in many countries of the world, not only in Latin America, but also in Africa, I would later go on, many years after the events of this book, I would go on and work in quite a few different African countries,
mm,
as well as other countries in Western Asia. There's often an important place in terms of health messaging, in terms of education, in terms of building understanding in the poorest communities for these traditional healers.
mm,
And, I would come to understand years later how important it would be to build bridges and connections between the traditional healers and the more formally trained professionals that, of course, we all hope to see spread in countries around the world.
yes, yes. Wow, that's really like a very broad story. Like, yeah, as in, we have to accept the way a community, runs its or operations. We have to understand how a community runs its operation, how it does its social amenities or social activities, and come to terms with that, understand it, and probably also, if it's not bad, if it's working for them, then probably just accept it also for them, with them. Yeah.
There were times when, I would see things that Guido would do, and I, admit I would wish that, he had other kinds of help available to him. But,
Mm,
one of the, I think, positive things about my experience was, I mean, I learned from Guido and from his role in the community. But I'd like to believe that some of the things that I was teaching
Mm.
rubbed off on Guido. And I think
Okay.
that,
That's good.
they did. I think both Guido and his then wife, Rosario, um, really took it upon themselves to go beyond, the scope of what one would normally expect, and really helped me going out to different little villages outside of the center of Buena Fe, and helping to talk to school teachers, helping to talk to other community leaders to introduce me so that I could fulfill my role and my services as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I think it was, quite a humbling experience as well.
Mm.
And I'll say that, many years later, over the course of the last 5, 10 years or so, actually, some of the children and grandchildren of the people that I met
Mm.
in those villages in Ecuador have reached out to me, if you can
Wow.
believe it, on Facebook and other social media,
Yeah.
just to kind of reestablish ties with me. And it's been rather marvelous in terms of being able to have that kind of unexpected contact with people, in such a different country, such a different environment than what one normally has.
Wow.
So that's been a bit of a joy as well.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's a wonderful thing to experience. Yes. But
Thank you.
talking of wonderful, you've gone through a lot also. You have been shot at, you've been arrested, you've been threatened and also endangered. You have, survived incredible and unexpected danger as a global humanitarian volunteer. Can you share some of the, the powerful lessons that you learned from your travels?
Well, one sobering experience I had actually while in Bolivia
Mm.
um, was when I was leading up a development project in the Chaco region of Bolivia on the border with Argentina and Paraguay, um, on behalf of this organization, Esperanza. And I ended up discovering or finding out about this guy who was apparently connected with US government military intelligence,
Mm.
who was trying to essentially infiltrate what we were doing. And he came up to me and basically introduced himself, supposedly as being from the U.S. Embassy up in La Paz, Bolivia. But I knew, he wasn't necessarily directly connected with the embassy. He was really up to no good, basically information gathering and seeking to have my help in terms of supporting, what he was doing.
Mm.
Now, perhaps policymakers, back in the United States had a range of different reasons, some good and some less good, in terms of wanting to have a collection of information.
Mm.
I don't want to say spying, but basically that kind of intelligence gathering in an area like that. But my concern was that this was actually something, if directly connected with our project, it would undermine our credibility with the Bolivian government authorities and put us all at danger or risk of being kicked out of the country, and interfering with the good that we were trying to do in terms of public health and agriculture and small animal husbandry in this isolated select section of Bolivia. And so I um, took some forceful action to have this guy discouraged from what he was doing. And then when he didn't take the hint, I threatened to call the local police chief on him, who I knew, and have him pulled out. But then the thing exploded in my face when a couple of days later I found myself being recalled to La Paz, um, and which was an arduous trip of about 24 to 36 hours by train and plane and other means, to then find out that the then U.S. ambassador was demanding that I be kicked out of the country.
Mm.
And he had no authority to do so. I wasn't working for the U.S. government. I'm working for I was working at that time for a private non-governmental organization, but I was able to meet with the officials at the USAID mission in La Paz, explain the circumstances, talk about the danger of what it would have been had I allowed this guy who had tried to penetrate our project team and project staff to continue to do some of the things that he was doing. And luckily, the mission director was able to go to the ambassador and make it very clear that he was out of line with what he was doing, and so I was spared being given what we used to call the skyhook in terms of being pulled out of the country. But it was a sobering experience, and it was also um, you know a uh, basically an opportunity for me to understand sometimes the challenges of different agendas, which may partially overlap in terms of, maybe what you're trying to do good within that kind of setting, but where there may be other agendas that might be also in conflict with that. So that was, one particularly challenging experience. And then, another experience came when I was taking the train down, actually taking a little bit of R&R, a little bit of a break, and going down to visit neighboring country of Chile on holiday. And as I was taking the train from La Paz, Bolivia, across the highlands of the Andes down to the coast of Chile, at that time, Chile still had the military dictatorship of Pinochet. And it was a sobering experience when we were all kind of stopped at the Chilean-Bolivian border and having to get off the train and show our passports to the Chilean military police before boarding the train to continue on our trip. And I remember the police officers who were interrogating myself and some of the people I was traveling with. They asked our names and all this, and then they asked me my name. They asked for my religion, and I said Jewish. And the guy said, "Oh, ha, ha, ha," and proceeded to say Heil Hitler and do a Nazi salute.
Oh.
And I almost reacted violently to that. A friend I was with restrained me, but it was a sobering reminder in terms of the reality of that military dictatorship and the fact that there was a lot of Nazi influence, after World War II in those countries of the southern cone of Chile and Argentina and Paraguay in particular. A lot of Nazis hidden there. Ultimately, I would make it down to Santiago, the capital of the country, and there meet up with a friend who was a reporter for the Christian Science Monitor, who was actually covering a memorial mass for one of the democratic leaders who had been marginalized when the democracy was overthrown in Chile in the early 1970s. This gentleman, Eduardo Frei, had passed away. He was a former president of Chile, and there was a mass at the cathedral in downtown Santiago. And I was there when the military police of the dictatorship proceeded to surround the square. They didn't dare enter into the cathedral to interfere with things because the archbishop from the Catholic Church had warned that any soldiers that violated the precincts of the church would be excommunicated. But immediately after the memorial mass ended, as people were coming out from the cathedral, the military police came in with water cannon and tear gas and rubber bullets and attacking basically the crowd. Many of them, of course, were protesting against the regime. So I had the experience of seeing that directly through something of the lens of an international journalist, because my friend was reporting, as I say, with the Christian Science Monitor.
Yeah.
We were holding up cartons to protect ourselves, against any kind of projectiles, and we had kind of handkerchiefs soaked in water to protect ourselves a little bit. mitigate against the tear gas that was going on.
Mm,
But the cartons that we were holding up to protect ourselves, I know, got hit with impacts of rubber bullets.
mm,
Luckily, both of us weren't hurt. I don't recall how many people actually were hurt in that melee, but my friend was able to report on it to the newspaper back in the States
mm.
and expose, again, some of the realities of what was going on in terms of that military dictatorship,
Yeah.
um, which ultimately would survive for, this is 1981, 82 or so when it happened. I guess the military dictatorship was finally overthrown and democracy returned to Chile, perhaps about 7 years later.
Mm,
Um, Now, of course, around the world, we see democracy being threatened in many different countries with the return of right-wing authoritarians, sometimes with military support. And so it gives me a particular perspective in terms of having seen the effects of military dictatorships on the social circumstances of countries in Chile as well as Argentina when I traveled through there and Paraguay, both of whom, all three of which were had military dictatorships at that time.
yeah. Wow. Well, after, experiencing all of these challenging and sobering experiences, would you still encourage, more young people to consider humanitarian services? And why do you think this is important, actually?
Well, I think it's important always for people to be exposed to circumstances that they might not otherwise be exposed to.
Mm,
Being in a situation where you are helping others, you are trying to, at least for a fixed amount of time, help address perhaps a disaster, a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, not just contributing money to a particular cause, but actually going out there, such as in the case of what's being happening here in the States with these terrible storms, increasing effects of climate change, the hurricanes
mm,
uh, that have come across North America just in the last week or two uh, that came in through Louisiana in the southern part of the United States, New Orleans, which of course was so badly hit by Hurricane Katrina and other hurricanes, um, and then went across the country to create even more flooding in the Northeast. Going and actually getting involved in those kinds of situations where people have possibly lost everything due to a flood or a natural disaster, I
yeah.
think it actually is of much more value to us, perhaps, than the people that you are actually trying to help. I mean, that's not to
Mm,
minimize, the assistance that one can provide in that kind of thing, trying to help people get access to food, trying to help people get access to clothing and protection, shelter. But I think when we stretch ourselves, when we force ourselves to not just, whatever our religious beliefs may be,
mm,
not just repeat whatever kind of prayers might exist, be it in a church or a synagogue or in a mosque, but actually be forced to directly be involved in serving and helping others with tremendous need. I think those are circumstances that help build us, that make us more complete people, that make us more compassionate people, as I was mentioning earlier. They create empathy for us and hopefully they make us better citizens in terms of the kinds of choices that we have to face, as citizens in the countries that we have. I was always very impressed when in different countries that I served in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, I would see people who didn't have a lot uh, sometimes be in situations where the little that they had, they would offer to others who perhaps were in even more tragic and difficult circumstances. And it probably fulfills a parable of faith that you can find in any of the religious traditions, be it Judaism or Christianity or Islam,
mm,
that understanding that even if you um, don't have that much or necessarily enough for yourself,
yeah.
um, nevertheless, you do so much more for yourself by giving to others who are in even more dire circumstances. I mean, those were certainly spiritual lessons that I came to appreciate in a range of different situations around the world.
I love that. Like you benefit yourself by giving so much to others. Like you gain a lot more, by impacting the world positively, by helping the people that are in need. And that is why humanitarian service is very important for everyone.
I
Yeah.
think that's very true. I think many of us find opportunities to be able to do that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily require participating in a formal service uh, contribution, service situation for a year or 2 years, such as we were talking about earlier about the Peace Corps.
Mm,
But really, I think in our daily lives, we often have a chance and a choice, where we come upon people who do have need to find practical ways of being able to personally give of ourselves.
yes.
Uh, Perhaps we're not in a situation to give much in the way of money, but to actually give something of ourselves, to sacrifice, at the very least, a bit of our time in
Mm,
terms of being able to help others or more. I think that always helps. And I think, you know, particularly for young people, it's important early on to have that opportunity where you are um, being forced to face that for part of your process of education. I think it also can help influence the kinds of decisions that young people may make in terms of the kinds of careers and jobs that they want to pursue.
mm, yes. And what are some of the, qualities that are meant to have in order to be successful in the world of international service or humanitarian service?
Well, I think the qualities are probably universal ones. Maybe one of the most important is that of being a good listener, active
Mm,
listening. I
mm,
think that's true in so many different circumstances. I'm reminded of this sign that I've seen, and I've seen different iterations of this in English as well as in Spanish, different places and in different restaurants where they put up a sign outside of the cafe or restaurant that says no Wi-Fi here. Talk to each other at your table. Now,
yeah.
I don't know if you've had occasion to see that, but it's in terms of the type of society that we have now, you often see people around the table. My wife and I were at a restaurant last night and we saw this, bunch of people around the table. Everyone is on their phones. They're busy
Mm,
texting and looking at things on their phones, and no one is talking to each other at the table.
mm,
And I think that that's part of today's society with technology and the types of social media that we're exposed to. All too often, we're prepared to give much more time to this device that is in our hands. It's almost permanently glued to our hand,
yeah.
rather than to actually engage with and talk with the people in front of us. And in that context, it's more than just talking to people. What's more important is actually listening to people.
Mm,
And I came to see that in terms of my own job. And admittedly, I learned quite a bit over time, from my own mistakes. The reality that we we really have to train ourselves when we're engaging in a conversation in the workplace, for
mm,
example, in a dialogue, asking a question about something. Don't rush to respond when you hear someone say something, thinking about what it is you're going to say at the next part of the conversation, but actually listen to what someone may be saying. If someone is perhaps making a comment or offering feedback about a particular situation that they see on a job in an office in the work environment, engaging in basically a dynamic conversation of questions where you are trying to inquire more of the person. Okay, tell me more in terms of what you're actually thinking and perceiving and understanding. I found as I grew up in responsibilities as a manager and as a leader that it was far more important for
Mm.
me to engage in active listening in terms of hearing what people were actually saying
Yeah.
and inviting them, pleading with them at times to actually talk to me and explain to me what they were actually feeling and thinking and observing, rather than necessarily perhaps saying things that they thought I wanted to hear. I
Mm.
think all too often, in our social circumstances, our work circumstances, people who are bosses and supervisors end up, frankly, usually being captive to the kinds of messaging that others think that you want to hear,
Mm.
rather than necessarily a full transparency and truth telling that we so desperately need,
Yeah.
within the workplace. So I think active listening is probably one of the most important kind of qualities that I would put forward there. I think the 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 essence of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the others,
Mm.
in the shoes of others, is probably a spiritual lesson. Again, regardless of your religious beliefs or your spiritual background, I think that that's also an important part of being able to have greater success in terms of whatever you're trying to do, be it, within humanitarian assistance, or be it within, the workplace of any kind of job that you may be in.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so we have to always listen attentively, listen to understand what the other person is trying to say. Yeah. And from your travels, you've seen a lot already, you've experienced a lot. And I'm sure a lot of things, from your challenging experiences, sobering experiences, things could have, want you to, change yourself or, adjust or compromise. How would you advise us to always stay true to ourselves and to those around us, no matter what the situation might be?
Well, I think, I went through um, certainly a great deal of search and discovery over
Mm.
the course of my lifetime. I came to terms with, different things and experiences that forced me to face up to perhaps bias and misunderstandings in things that I might otherwise not have done.
Mm.
Certainly, working in um, different circumstances in Africa, being able to come to an understanding that you can't just think of Africa, for example, as one monolith. I mean, obviously, you're talking about not only 50 countries or so that are part of Africa, but you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of different social groups. I mean, all of those were things that forced me to kind of uh, grow and expand my own kind of understanding and appreciation
Mm.
of social circumstances. One of um, I guess the practical reflections of that was in South Africa, which was the last country that I served in, where I served as ultimately as the deputy mission director and then the acting regional mission director for Southern Africa. I was heading up a team, you could say, and a mission of over 250 people. Perhaps a third of them were Americans, and two-thirds of them were a range of different nationalities, third country nationals,
Mm.
and South Africans that came from very different backgrounds. I mean, not only as different as white Afrikaners and black South Africans, but even among the black South Africans, um, the South Africans coming from very different languages, very different social experiences, different parts of the country, and trying to reconcile that and understand that, forced me to really um, accept some humility in terms of what I thought my understanding and perhaps initial attempts to find quick answers to problems. And I dealt over the years in South Africa as well as earlier in Nigeria
Mm.
and Angola with questions of stigma for different populations and marginalization. In South Africa, I had to deal with stigma and actually violence that was going on between Black South Africans in some of the more impoverished communities of Johannesburg and Gauteng province against Zimbabweans and other undocumented aliens
Mm.
who had come to South Africa in terms of looking for employment and trying to find creative ways to curb that, as well as to build understanding in terms of different communities. And certainly some were more inclined to try to brush this under the carpet, but it was very important for us to find ways of being able to address the kind of violence and extremist reaction. Particularly I know you're of a Nigerian background,
Yes.
um, and so the reaction of Nigerians and South Africans in that kind of context was also something that we came to see. It
Mm.
was actually, it gave us great amusement to see it expressed in this South African director's movie. I don't know if you ever saw District 9.
No,
Did you
not
see
no,
that?
I didn't see it.
Oh, it's an incredible South African science fiction movie
Mm.
about basically the effects 10 years later of this huge alien ship that comes and kind of parks over Johannesburg.
Mm.
And the aliens that are on that ship are actually refugees. They're called what was the term that they gave them? Prawns.
Mm.
Because they kind of look like giant crustaceans, giant shrimp,
Yeah.
uh, and they're sick and they're poor. They're not the kind of aliens that you associate with in kind of typical science fiction movies where people have come to attack the earth or anything. No, these people are looking for health, and in fact, the South Africans are busy dealing with refugees from among these aliens,
Mm.
yeah, that have come down. And in the course of the movie, you end up finding out about how there are all these different mafias, Nigerian mafia that are smuggling goods that
Yeah.
they know the aliens really come to enjoy in the slums outside of Johannesburg. And obviously, that's a clear parable for the kind of social circumstances that we face today
Yes.
in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa. So
Mm.
I strongly recommend it to you, Toby, and to any of the folks listening to this who haven't seen District 9. I'm blanking on the name of the director. I think it's Niels Blomkamp or something. I'm probably doing something with his name, but it's a brilliant
Yeah.
South African science fiction movie
Wow.
that really talks a lot
Mhm.
in code, of course, about the kinds of social circumstances that we face today as humans.
Wow. I have to check that out. District 9, you said.
District 9, for
District
sure.
9.
He did
District 9.
another movie called Chappie,
Mm.
also dealing with the reality of this robot, I think, on the loose in South Africa. But
Oh, okay.
District 9 is the one that I was talking about.
Yes. Wow. See, from our conversation so far, I can realize that your book is so filled up with a lot of life experiences. You've experienced a lot, and there are a lot of things that readers out there could learn from your book, from your life experiences that you've packed into your memoir. I believe there's a new one coming out very soon, right? Or you're working on other projects. Can you tell us
I
about
am.
other projects here?
I am. I put out Andean Adventures about a year ago,
Mm.
and I released the audio version of it on Amazon and Audible in April. It's been selling pretty good, but I hope to be able to increase the awareness of it among people as well, and certainly encourage people to consider downloading either the ebook Kindle version or the paperback if they prefer. But in addition, I'm working on a project that has a working name of Arab and Afghani Adventures,
Mm.
talking about my experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mm.
I served a total of a couple of years in different parts of Iraq and in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And I also am trying to pull together my notes for maybe something that I'll call African Adventures,
Mm.
for lack of a better name, talking about my experiences in a range of different countries, but particularly Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa.
Oh,
My
yeah,
family
good.
and I spent a total of about almost 10 years
Mm.
in Africa. And there's a lot to share from that.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to that. So what's the best way, to get a copy of your book? And also what's the best way to connect and work with you in case, by the time the new books will come out, for us to stay up to date and, get the book immediately they are out. What's the best way to do all of this?
Well, people can certainly look up Andean Adventures on Amazon. It's available on Amazon.
Mm,
They can look up my name, Allan J. Wind, or Allan J. Alonzo Wind on Amazon. And they can find ways of contacting me there through the author's profile on Amazon.
mm,
They can also visit my website at ennoble.net. That's ENABLE
mm.
ENNOBLE.net,
Awesome.
where I have a website. I have the links to purchase those books and others available. And also people can connect with my newsletter. I've been putting out more or less every 4 to 6 weeks a newsletter trying to share current thoughts and experiences, as well as a blog
Mm.
that's up on the website as well as actually on the Amazon site. And I encourage people who have any interest at all to come and visit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll place all of this information in the show notes of this episode. So I encourage everyone to click on the links, to copy the links and get across to Alan and get the book on Amazon and also, be blessed and stay in touch for the new adventure books that are coming out very, very soon. So if there's like a lesson that you could teach us like from your life experience so far, like just one from your spiritual growth, personal development, that that life has taught you from all of this experience, what would that be? What would that lesson be that you would love to tell the listeners and myself today?
Well, I guess one lesson I can say um, is that, in the very difficult politics of the United States, there's a, there's a concept called American exceptionalism, where it's considered to be somehow a piece of patriotic duty for Americans to subscribe to this concept of American exceptionalism, which basically is arguing that somehow America is better than others. It really stands out as uh, the greatest country in the world and far better than any other. And I think my experiences overseas certainly taught me to appreciate that true patriotism,
Mm,
true love for one's country
mm,
comes not from necessarily subscribing to a narrow kind of chauvinistic view, be it of your clan or your tribe or your country or
mm,
what have you, but from really looking at humanity as a whole
mm,
and recognizing that every country, every people have things that help them stand out. That for me is perhaps one of the most important lessons, and it's an adjunct to my own spiritual search, where I examined different spiritual traditions and experiences. I talk about it a bit also within the book Andean Adventures,
mm.
and how I kind of came to terms ultimately with the spiritual choices that I made. So I would have to say that that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I can share with you today.
Wow, that's very beautiful. Thank you so much, Alan, for everything you've been able to share with us today and everything I've been able to learn from you in this episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing your life experience in this book. And thank you so much, for all the humanitarian service that you offer to the world. You've, had a great impact on the world already. And for this, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Toby. Very kind. And I'm so happy to have had the chance to meet you and chat with you today.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.